Hi, I'm Brad Anderson, and here at Qualtrics, I have the privilege of being the president of the product group here. So my team is the team that's responsible for building the tools that, more than 20,000 organizations around the world use on a daily basis. Now, the way our tools get used is people use our tools to understand the lived experiences of their customers, of their prospects, of their employees. Now, historically, when people think about Qualtrics, they think about a survey platform, and of course, that's where we got started. But the majority of our innovations over the last 5 years have been focused on NLU, NLP, and AI, because the reality is there's far more that can be learned by the unstructured, unsolicited data where customers and employees are already talking about their experiences without even having to fill out a survey. And so the largest part of our growth in terms of usage and revenue has been in helping an organization collect and then understand and then act on this mass of information that is unsolicited, is unstructured. And that is where I've been spending the bulk of my time over the last 4 years. And so that is where I've had a chance to really dig deep and understand where can you put AI to work to really transform an organization and how that organization serves their key constituents.
It's so good to see you again. I so enjoyed our chat over dinner. That was fun. And I told Henrik about how insightful you were about AI adoption and culture change. And I said, we've got to get Brad on the podcast. I want to start at a different place, Brad. I was thinking about this conversation. I know we want to talk about AI, and you've written eloquently, you've spoken eloquently about it. I wanted to kind of take a step back in your career because it's really cool to get to talk to somebody who's worked for so many incredible leaders. I know, for example, you worked with Satya for a bunch of years at Microsoft. And I just thought it'd be fun actually to start outside of AI for a second and just kind of get your thoughts on what'd you learn from Satya about leading an enterprise?
It's actually a really common question that I get, believe it or not. To this day, I've been at Qualtrics 4 years now. At least once a week, I get the question of, why did you leave Microsoft and come to Qualtrics? And what was it that changed Microsoft when Satya became the CEO?
Hmm.
So I had a chance to report directly to Satya for the 4 years before he became CEO. And then after he became CEO, I was definitely a trusted advisor and a trusted leader by him. He's a very close personal friend, someone I admire and respect and love deeply. But in terms of as I would describe Satya, the first thing I would say is, everyone knows him as this incredible leader. But even before that, he's just an incredible human being. Like his ability to be able to learn and listen and understand who you are as a person. I mean, that really is core to who he is. And then a lot of that came from experiences that, he and his wife had as they were raising their son who was disabled, Zach. Um, but then, I got to work with Satya for those 4 years before he became CEO, where he was really kind of proving out a lot of the concepts that he then took to the entire company. And, first and foremost, everything was about culture.
Hmm.
And how do you drive the right culture and specific things like how do we make sure at Microsoft, we are learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls? Because I would argue that for the bulk of the company's history, they, kind of acted like know-it-alls.
Yeah.
That was one thing.
Can I ask just on that, how do you discern a learn-it-all versus a know-it-all? Seems
Yeah.
like it's easier to discern a know-it-all, but what's the evidence that someone's got a learn-it-all mentality?
Yeah. Are you asking questions and are you inquisitive?
Hmm.
One of the things I always look for when I'm interviewing leaders is, are they inquisitive? That's a big, big part of it. So learn it all versus a know it all culture. Um, the second thing that I tell people that how he really kind of changed the culture in the engineering teams is all of the celebration and reward system moved away from shipping to usage.
Hmm.
So think about that for a minute. When you're incented, your equity, your bonus is all based upon, did you ship something? It doesn't matter if what you shipped is good or not.
Right.
There's the old proverbial wait till service pack one for Microsoft, and some of that played into there. When you ship the whole reward system to usage, now the customer is the center of the entire focus of the engineering team. And, when something's happening with a customer doing deployment is blocked, whatever the case may be, is everybody, it's all hands on deck and you get the customer up and running. So the, related very much to culture and this know it all versus learn it all is also the concept of how do you make sure that the customer that is the core part of your celebration and your reward system. And I would argue in a SaaS company, the best way to do that for the engineering teams is to have their metrics all be based on high quality usage. So for example, if you were to go look at my teams and how I reward them, It's not about revenue. It's not about shipping. It's are people using what you built?
Wow. Simple but powerful paradigm shift when you realize all the other ways teams can be managed and incentivized.
Mm-hmm. The last thing I would say is you look at for the first couple of years that Satya was the CEO, he largely had the same leadership team around him that Steve had, but the company felt very, very different. And I love Steve just as much as I love Satya, but his focus on culture and his focus on driving the right culture was just remarkable in what it did for the company.
Could you give an
Sure.
example of how that kind of came to life?
Yeah, I can give some specific examples, and so let's talk about this example of putting the customer at the center of your reward and recognition system around usage, right? I'll never forget the first time I really understood when Satya was serious about this. I think it was 2011. And we were having a conversation about a bunch of our senior people and if they were going to get promoted or not. And there was one individual who came up for a conversation of a promotion. Um, you know, this would be like the technical fellow. I mean, one of the most respected individuals in the company. And as we were talking about this individual, Satya made the comment of this person is great. They do great work, but what they've built in the last year or two is not being used. And it doesn't matter if it's the most beautiful architecture on the planet. If it's not being used, it's not creating value for customers. It's not creating value for Microsoft. Therefore, why should we reward this person if they've not created value?
I mean, it's such a strong point, and obviously one that normally is like a little bit ignored because of the other metrics are easier.
And this is one of those ones where everyone walked out of that room going, okay, Satya is serious about this. The recognition and reward system is changing.
Yeah.
And it drove culture change.
Do you, I mean, like from the outside, obviously where Satya in the kind of the last few years has really gotten to shine is this understanding of AI and the importance and the speed on which it seems that he kind of like pushed the organization to embrace it. Are you able to tell a little bit about like how you've seen that?
Well, I've been watching from the outside as well, even though I still have quite a few friends after being there for 18 years. Um, I think it just comes down to focus. I mean, I remember sitting one time in a conversation with Satya in 2010 or 2011, where back at that point, 98% of Microsoft business was on-prem software. And, Satya had come in to lead what was the cloud and enterprise division. He had come from Bing. So he had been building SaaS for 7 or 8 years while none of the rest of us had been building true SaaS, right? And I remember one of my first conversations with him, and he asked the question, Brad, what if we completely stop any investment on the on-prem solutions for the next 2 years? Did a student body shift right, get everybody working on the cloud server, and then, we can come back and add some value to that. What would that look like? But that's the kind of focus he would bring to any conversation. It's not like you can't go in something and be half into it. If something is going to be changing, like, this transition from on-prem software to SaaS, it was a fundamental transformation of the platform. You have to focus. He participated, like many of us, in the transition from the mainframe platform to the PC platform. Saw that firsthand. He saw the transformation as you went from on-prem software to SaaS, and you pattern match. And AI is just the latest platform transformation, but it's going to be happening at a fastest rate than it's ever happened. So he knew that the company had to be pivoted quickly.
Maybe that's a cool kind of pivot point now, going back to your comment that Satya was laser focused on culture. I know from our conversations privately, I know that's a big passion of yours as well, obviously. Can you talk for a minute about how you think about an AI culture? And or do maybe start with, do you think of an AI culture? And if so, what are the hallmarks of an AI first or forward or oriented, however you define that culture?
Yeah, great question. So at its simplest form, if a company aspires to be an AI leader, I would argue every individual in the company should be using AI on a daily basis. So if I was sitting with the leader and the leader would ask me, Brad, what would you do if you wanted to really make sure your company is going to be one of the leaders in this new platform of AI? My response is the first thing I would measure is, are my people using AI every single day, every function? Accounting, legal, engineering, product, UX, is every function using AI every day? Because, you learn as you do. And so I think that is the most important thing. That's the first thing. The second thing, and I'm sure we'll spend some more time on this. like any platform transition, there's fear and there's anxiety, there's cautiousness. And so you see a lot of leaders saying like, hey, we don't want our people using, AI right now. We don't understand it. We don't know what the risks are. And so they say no, but what happens is people just bring it in from their homes. And so they're actually in a worse position because then what's happening is they're using their personal, AI interfaces and apps, which is going into the large language model. It's not even going in, it's not protected. And so, I think you have to create a playground. We have that at Qualtrics. We have what we call the AI playground. And the AI playground is a place where all of our people can go in and use AI, and we can be sure, and we can assure our customers that none of the data that is being used as we're putting AI to work is ever being used externally to train any other large language models. And so, that's another big part is having that playground.
Can I just ask a couple of questions here? I don't want to interrupt your role. I want to slow your roll, but like
You're
I
good.
already have 1,000 questions. AI daily, every function, every day. As you think about that at Qualtrics and as you're rolling out that kind of I love, by the way, that you defined culture as behavior. I'm 100% aligned with that. You started immediately talking behaviorally. I learned from Mary Barra, culture is just how we all behave. That's her quote. I think it's dead on. So you immediately went to every single person must be using AI in every function every day. What are the kind of on-ramps that you have found useful in helping somebody in, say, finance or procurement or marketing? Because I think a lot of people go, use it to do what?
Exactly.
Yeah. What have you found useful in accomplishing or sparking that behavior change?
Yep. So I'll give you an example of what I do at least every week, maybe several times in the week. So we'll have a few minutes, as people are joining a meeting or maybe we're kind of wrapping up a little bit early. I'll be talking to the team and I said, hey, let me show you what I've been working on in my notebook LLM. And I'll pull up, a shared notebook that myself and a few people are working on, show how we've imported data into it, start asking questions of it, and actually just show people how to do it. Even when we were trying to help organizations transition from on-prem to the cloud, and then, for example, when you move to the cloud with Office 365, are you still attaching documents to email or are you actually sharing shared documents? That's a behavior change. And so the only way that I've ever known to drive behavior change is you have to show people. And so, most organizations know who their formal and their informal leaders are. And you need those formal and informal leaders constantly showing and demonstrating the new ways in which business can be done. I'll give you an example. Our legal team, you can imagine the red lines that we're going through with customers day in and day out, across 20,000 plus customers. The way that you can put AI to work to answer all the RFPs, all the red lines, it dramatically improves the speed and the accuracy that you can do things like that. So that's an example where people say like, well, how is legal going to benefit from using, generative AI? They can't live without it now.
Wow. Wow.
When you talk about leadership and you talk about like showing them, can you talk to us a little bit about maybe how you started, but also like how do you yourself then upgrade your own ability to use it? Because obviously it seems that you're showing the way forward by example.
Yeah, this challenge of how do we upskill our people? Like, I'll give you an example. Yeah, I've got a really specialized teams of AI and ML scientists, that the bulk of them have come from Toronto. It's kind of like the center of gravity for AI, it seems like. But that team is the largest constriction point for me right now as I think about how I scale all the innovation that we're doing in AI. And as you can imagine, the competition for this talent is fierce. And so, I think every organization, you have to have a core like that really understands the technology and all the models and stuff behind that. But then you got to figure out how you take and you upskill 15%, then 30%, then 50% of your engineering and product team. And so we have very specific programs that we're putting in place that, enable us to have engineers who are kind of riding along with the specialists in the team that we call DICE, that's our AI team. They get a chance to go along on the journey. They're learning, and then they can go and start doing a bunch of the work that, 2 months before that only could be done by this specialized team.
How do those ride-alongs work? Are they're actually invited to all the meetings? It's like a legit old school apprenticeship. That's what I'm imagining. It's like, sit here while I weld this and watch me put the beads, right? Is that what's happening? Like, what does it look
Well,
like?
we hope to minimize the number of meetings our people are in for sure. And so it really is just about understanding the coding and the practices, the methodologies, all those pieces in it. So it's probably less meetings and it's probably more one-on-one where organizations, the two different individuals are working on an end-to-end scenario. And then the trained AI and ML engineers that we have are showing and demonstrating to these other people how to do that. So they learn as they do it. And then what happens is they can go and then teach the next set.
Back
Go
to
on.
the
Yeah.
how you do it yourself. Like,
Oh yeah.
what's your own kind of like,
That's what I was about to ask too. So we're right on the same page. That's exactly it.
Yeah. It's a super valid question. It's all really about time and where do you spend your time. The only way that you really can learn is to do. Whether it's trying to understand what the concepts of coding are, whether it's trying to understand what the concepts of inclusion are, I think you have to have experiences, and I say experiences, some experiences are of the heart and some experiences are of the mind. So I really believe that you learn through experiences. So the first thing that I ever did when I opened up ChatGPT, I guess 2 years ago now, was write me a product vision document for Qualtrics. And then I started to give it all the specifics, that I wanted it to include and stuff. And when it came back, I remember looking at it going like, the strategy and the top level pieces are all very, very close. The depth is not there. But, with any of these AI, especially generative AI, the depth and the quality of the prompt that you put in completely dictates the quality and the depth of the output. And so that was my first experience. And then, my children who are in university would come home and they would show me how they were doing their coding assignments and their writing assignments in minutes. Like I'll never forget, our youngest son was home on a Sunday night and he said, yeah, I've got 3 papers that are due at midnight. I'm going like, hey, it's 10 o'clock right now. You got 2 hours. He said, don't worry about it. ChatGPT wrote them for me, turned them in 30 minutes.
Okay. So, now we have to take a slight diversion. This will not be a surprise to Henrik, but the specifics of it will be. I'm often diverting. I think a non-obvious hack, I don't know, Brad, if you and I talked about this at dinner the other night, but I actually think a non-obvious hack for success as a senior executive is having children in their mid-20s who aren't afraid to say, Dad, you're a doofus. Dad, you're doing it wrong. Dad, have you heard about this thing? So many CEOs and senior leaders that I know who've created literally billions of dollars of market cap because of products that their kids told them, you guys aren't in this field, you aren't in this category. And none of their employees could tell them that.
Mhm.
None of their employees could talk back, so to speak, but you can't fire your kid. And I actually think a non-obvious hack is talk to your kids about stuff they're doing and what they're using, because it's a way to get much more unfiltered feedback. That's my hot take. Your reaction? What do you think?
Yeah, it's more than feedback. It's actually direction.
Mm,
These kids are seeing things and doing things, at scale and on a daily basis a year before the industry is.
yeah. Yeah. So it's a way of getting in front of extreme users, so to speak. But you brought the extreme user to your dinner table and all of a sudden it's not work, right? I think a lot of times actually part of the problem is the construct of work, right? Am I working right now? All of a sudden I act a certain way, I think a certain way. But when there's more kind of casual environments, more, it's laid back, it goes from a waffle to a pancake, right? The compartments disappear, stuff starts spreading around and mixing. I love pastries. So of course I think in terms of pastries, right? But I think that's actually really important to have that kind of uncompartmentalized interaction with lead users.
I 100% agree. And that's another example, where are the communities and the sources that you're learning from? So just continuing on the question from Henrik, I listen to a lot of podcasts. Like there was a podcast a couple of months ago that Brett Taylor had done about the work that they're doing in the agentic space. It was incredible to listen to. Right. So, you find the podcast and I have a dozen of them that I listen to on a daily and on a weekly basis. And it's funny, my family listens to a bunch of the same podcasts. And so like the entire family listens to All In. And then we have chats in the family chat about, about the All In podcast. So that's another thing that I do.
Huh.
Another thing that I end up doing is, really my role and the role of my leaders right below me are trying to understand where is the market going to be 2, 3, and 5 years from right now. The teams are all executing on what I call Horizon 1 investments, which are things that are going to come out the next year, going to have impact in the next year. But we're trying to see around the corners and try to understand what does this look like in 3 to 5 years. And the pace at which AI is driving change is like nothing we've ever seen before. I mean, look at what was announced last week at the AWS reInvent. and then the 12 days of shipments coming out from OpenAI, it's remarkable how much innovation is coming out. And so I block out specific time to just go read and experiment and do things that are going to help me to understand and give me a basis for where the market may go. Like right now, I'm spending a lot of time learning about what does agentic AI agents look like? What does that look like? How is that going to change businesses?
Would you explain what that is?
Yeah. And so the word agentic comes from agency. Here's about the easiest way to describe it. What I see in the future is you'll go to a website and there's going to be an agent that you will interact with, and that agent will be able to take action on everything that that website can do. So rather than you having to go in and navigate a website to do whatever you're trying to do, book a hotel, book a flight, you'll be able to go in simple language, describe what it is that you're wanting to do. The agent will go do it all for you, including going across different websites. That's a fundamental change.
So do you think then you're actually going to a website, or do you think your agent, whatever that is talking to their, like my agent is talking to your agent kind of thing?
Yeah, it's probably both, right? And it's probably a question of when in time. One of the questions that you kind of have to ask yourself is like, are these things going to be the primary form function that we're still working on? And if they are,
Note to listeners, Brad held up a mobile device just for those who aren't watching on
mobile
YouTube.
device or a PC, if those are going to be the predominant devices that you're working on, then you're probably still going to have apps and those kind of things. But if the primary way that you're interacting is glasses or ears, voice, then it won't be apps anymore. You'll be talking to an agent. So I think a lot of it will also depend on where the experience is centered at going forward.
If you were betting, do I hear that that's kind of like where you would bet that augmented vision and audio is kind of, because 3 and 5 years is a long time away from now, right? Is that where you think the puck might be going?
In my mind, 3 to 5 years, I still think we're largely using the same form factors.
Yeah.
And so I think we're still going to be in an apps and a web-based model, but it's just going to be fundamentally different because there's going to be an agent there. And I may have a personal agent on my device that understands my preferences, what I want to do and then interacting. But I think we'll still be in a similar model. Just the way that things will be automated and done will be just much faster, much easier, much quicker.
So Henrik, we can just make this a slight, cul-de-sac diversion for a second. Let's talk about innovation more broadly. Set aside AI for a second. We had a really fascinating conversation earlier on the podcast with David Akniev, who's one of the founders of Typeform, who talked really eloquently about organizing for innovation. And when you talk about Horizon One, you said most of your folks are really focused on the near term here now, but then you have folks, who are focused on the next 3 to 5 years, kind of typical Horizon 2 stuff. Can you give us a sense for how you think about organizing the organization for the various horizons? Is it the responsibility of a different group, or how do you attend to both executing the current business and exploring what's coming?
Yeah, that's like the $1 trillion question, right? You get that right and magic happens. You do it wrong and there's trouble you have to wade through. So here's how I think about it. I think about 4 horizons: H0, H1, H2, H3. H0 is another way to think about it is KTLO, keep the lights on. What is the work that you have to do if you're not even adding any incremental value, just to make sure that the product is scaling and meeting the needs of what you've already promised? Okay, so that's let's call that H0 KTLO. A world-class SaaS organization has about 20% of their capacity inside of that KTLO or H0 work. Then as I think about H1 is innovation that's going to come out in the next year and have a financial impact for the company in the next year. H2 is the same thing, but in a 2 or 3 year horizon. And then Horizon 3 is in a 3 to 5 year horizon. And so the way that I've always tried to operate this is I try to have about 50% of the organization working in H1, 35% working in H2, and 15% working in H3. So that's the first thing that I do is, because you've got to make sure that you're investing for the now, the near future, and then the far future.
But are they different teams? And do they know that they're focused on different things, or is it within teams and product owners and things like that?
It's a combination of the two. The majority of the organization is focused on H1 and H0, 1 and 2. With H3, that is where we usually start to pull a separate team out. It's like, you talk about the traditional 1 pizza box team or 2 pizza box team, moving quickly, you're iterating, you're co-designing and co-innovating with customers. And so you're just moving very, very quickly. And then what you want to have is you want to have stage gates where you can see how the progress is being made. And then what you want to have happen optimally is when something gets to the point where it's ready to actually have the rest of the team work on it, you graduate it out of that team into the masses. The thing that I always try to avoid is trying to have an A team and a B team. For example, if you go back to the Microsoft days, there was the Windows 95 team and the Windows NT team, and the Windows 95 team always kind of felt like they were inferior to the NT team. And so I really try to stay away from having this concept of, this is the dream team and this is everybody else. But I do believe you have to have people who are focused, who are also 0 to 1 people. And so with all of your people, whether they're an engineer or a UX designer or a product manager, you've got some people who are world-class at 0 to 1. That's actually hard to find those. You've got people who are world-class at 1 to 2, or we're version 1.1 to 1.2. And so you need to make sure you've got the people in the right places in the skill set. So that Horizon 3 group is a really critical group for us.
The I think it's important that you mention this thing about like the 0 to 1, or, the originators, like the people that kind of stare at the blank piece of paper and then kind of think of something that's useful for the customer. In a world where it's easier and easier to start stuff, and where obviously entrepreneurship is something that a lot of people strive for, how do you attract and how do you create a culture for the originators to make them kind of stay in an organization rather than go and do it by themselves?
Well, my experience is I've seen two kind of originators. There are those who just want to just innovate and then basically not worry about taking it to scale. And that's, for example, that was like the people that I worked with at Microsoft Research for so many years, and they were just incredible at what they did. And then there are other people who say, listen, hey, I've got this idea. I want to take it forward, but I also want to take it to the point where it scales and it's $1 billion business. And so I think having the ability to understand what each individual is motivated by, what they're trying to accomplish in their lives, in their career, and then setting them up to do that. I love having some people who are just that rapid innovation, running on week sprints. They're experimenting. 80% of the things that they're doing are failures or they're not correct. But ultimately, if something's going to scale, it's got to come into a team that knows how to take it to scale.
Can we shift gears back to AI? Thank you for that slight detour down the cul-de-sac of the innovator's dilemma. And now for a regularly scheduled programming. Can you take us back to the early days of the Gen AI, call it adoption curve at Qualtrics? What did you do to get people aware, to build excitement? What are some of the early stage activities from a top-down perspective you sponsored or encouraged?
Yeah. So I held what I called an AI summit. And so in the spring of 2023, I mean, really, ChatGPT, a lot of people knew about it, but it hit critical mass in February, March of 2023, right?
Yeah.
So in the spring, I held a 2-day AI summit. What I asked everybody in my organization, I call my team PXE, Product User Experience Engineering. I said, listen, just take a couple of days off, put your pencils down, and all I want you to do is go experiment and play around with our AI playground. Being very specific, because I wanted them experimenting in where I knew all the data was going to be secure and safe and private. And then what we did is we had 2 days and we just sat there and we looked at demo after demo after demo of functioning code of how Gen AI was being put to work. There were 80 demos that were put together that we looked at.
Wow. Wait, after 2 days of playing, you had a 2-day summit and you had 80 demos of stuff that people had built.
Well, so the playing had occurred before the summit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And so, people had taken time before that. And once you get working on something that is interesting and unique, I mean, everyone was working later than 5 or 6 o'clock, if you will. But we sat there for 2 days and we had, let's say, 70 of the most senior leaders in the Pixie organization in that meeting, watching example after example, because, it was good for everyone to learn, but then all of the leadership was able to see and understand what the experiments were in the different categories and the different things. And then I followed that up with a second AI summit about 4 months ago, and a similar kind of a thing. And then, for example, when we were down in at that event that we were at, I showed a few demos. Those demos were all part of the innovation summit, the AI summit V1 that we did. Those were all things that were started there, and then we took them to product.
Wow. You know what? I'm going to give you a word for it. You declared recess. And I love that you actually used a playground. So it totally works. It's like a perfect metaphor. And the reason I mentioned that, I think I told Henrik this story, but I was at a big conference, and, a global research leader had just done like a huge deck, like global presentation. And the CMO who's running this conference said, hey, so-and-so, you just gave this enormous State of the Union. Would you summarize it for the audience? There's like 2,000 people there. And he said, effectively said, sure, I'll do it in 3 words. Recess is over. And he said, it's time to get down to business. And he had a very stern, and everybody in the crowd is kind of solemnly nodding, and I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do? Because I know I'm right down the line in the panel. And I said, I love what he said about recess. That's great. Can you raise your hands if your company has declared a recess? And no hands across 2,000 people. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't define recess. Time to play without regard for the consequences or day-to-day responsibilities. Hands up, please. Again, no hands. And I said, I think the problem is not that recess is over, but that in most of these organizations, recess hasn't even begun, right? And how can you possibly imagine, groundbreaking possibilities if nobody's playing with the stuff? And so to me, I actually think it's huge to call a 2-day, to say, take 2 days to experiment. And then 70 senior leaders are going to take 2 days to review your experiments. I mean, just talk about the investment from a people time perspective. It's enormous. And yet most organizations can't even get there because they go, we can't let up from the H0, keep the lights on is everybody's got to work at a breakneck pace all the time and nobody can even look up from it, right? How did you rationalize using that time prior to, now you can look back and go, it was worth it. But looking into it, you go, dude, am I really going to give everybody 2 days to play? How did you as a leader rationalize that?
I honestly had no doubt that it was going to be a success. We've run hackathons for a long, long time. And this is just a different kind of flavor of a hackathon. And, in the hackathons that we run, we'll always set up categories and say, like, hey, here's a category most useful for customers, most useful for engineers, the most innovative use of AI. And then we have financial awards that we give to people for winning these hackathons. And they've been incredibly successful. And so this was just an iteration on that hackathon concept. It's been so successful for us. I talked about the version 1 that we had of an AI summit and the version 2. A few months ago, I also held what I called a PLG summit, product-led growth, where I had all the teams coming in and showing the things that we can do in the product to help customers understand what are the things that they can do to get more value from us. Similar kind of thing. Take a couple of days, experiment on it, come in and show us what you've learned, what you've done. And then, we green light some things, some other things are being worked on. But for us, our culture, that has been a very, very successful way to focus and really emphasize the importance of something.
I'm just imagining here based on actually a conversation Henrik and I had recently with the head of AI at Moderna, who you've probably seen. They've done a lot of really cool stuff. Bryce was telling us that out of one of their early kind of hackathon type activities, they kind of dubbed or knighted a bunch of champions, folks who are early stage adopters who've got cool ideas and champion. I'm just thinking of your statement about rewards or incentives. What kinds of incentives do you find are motivating to people? And how do you leverage the momentum that's created from that event to start to cascade into sustained behavior change? Because it's easy for that just to be a blip on the radar, right? It's like, we did that 2-day hackathon, now back to the day-to-day. And there's some kind of sustained accountability structure I'm sure you've got in place. What does that look like?
Yeah, let me see if I can answer your question and tell me if I don't answer it entirely, Jeremy.
Sure.
So 2 things come to mind. The first is, you take a look at all of these innovations, these pilots, these proof of concepts. And let's say of the 70, we say like, hey, these 15 right here, we want to get to prioritize that, have you inserting that into your roadmap. And in a really well-run SaaS organization, the product leaders are the ones who manage the backlog. And so on a daily basis, the product managers can go and ship the priority and insert things above and insert things below. So then when the team has capacity, they go to the next important thing. So that's how we interlace things in. And you rely upon the product leaders to make the decision on what's going to have the biggest impact for the customer and for the company. That's the first thing. Then the second thing that I believe in deeply is take a look at this transformation to an AI. Every engineer who's thinking about their future knows they're more valuable if they're skilled in AI. So a really big part of this is we are helping you grow your skills, your capabilities, your career. We hope you stay with us for a long, long time, but some of you are going to leave. And if we can help you improve your sellability, your capabilities by giving you AI experience, people will engage in that. They will absolutely engage, and they'll engage hard.
You have in your organization, there seem to be 3 groups in the organization, at least I'm involved in. One, which is kind of, you have the people who are kind of most like completely on board. They're evangelizing it and they send you stuff all the time, stuff they've done with AI. And then you have the group that's kind of, it's intriguing and they use it a little bit, or they got like, they're open for it. It's just like they have day-to-day task and they feel they're already stretched. And then you have a little bit of the group that kind of like, this is bad, or I don't want to engage with this. Have you seen the same kind of dynamic? And two, like, do you have a way that you deal with these different groups in a different way?
I think every company of size has got people that are in each of those three categories. Um, the things that when I think about those three categories, the last one, the ones who are opposed, they're not being passive, they're opposed, you know, they can be like a poison.
Yeah.
And so I think leaders have got to have the ability to have enough signal coming in to understand who those people are, go have a conversation with them. And sometimes it's just, the person needs to leave the organization or the company. But you have more people in that middle one in your category too, which are the ones who are more passive. And that's where I think the greatest opportunity and risk is. If, the organizations that are able to get that middle category skilled up and really driving are the ones who are going to deliver more innovation than anyone else. And so that's where I put my focus at, because that group of individuals, those product managers, those designers, those engineers are going to be the ones who are going to make the difference, because that's the scale. So Henrik, you could kind of think like maybe 20% of you are in that, they're sending you stuff, they're all in. 70% are in that category too, and 10% are the detractors. 70% is the lever.
Yeah.
That's the group you got to upskill.
Mm. What are some of your personal favorite AI tools that you find yourself using on a regular basis? Or maybe the last thing in one of these meetings when folks are coming on, you say, hey, let me show you what I've been doing. Like, what have you been doing in the last week?
Yeah. So if you were asking that question of my family, they would say, Dad is obsessed with ChatGPT. I don't remember the last time I went to Google, or being honestly, that's the Microsoft coming out of me saying being there, right? I just love how fast I can learn and get information with ChatGPT. So, I mean, it is probably 20, 25 times a day that I'm in ChatGPT. From Google, this thing called Notebook LLM.
Yeah, with the audio thing, it's
Oh, yeah.
incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible. I'll give you an example of something that, that I had then showed to a bunch of people about how I'm using it. So inside of Qualtrics, we have two centers of gravity. There's the product team that builds the product, and then there's the go-to-market team. And each of us, as we're doing our annual planning, you put your plans together, here are the priorities and stuff. Well, what I did is I went and pulled those two documents into Notebook, and I said, tell me where we're aligned and where we're not aligned. And it was remarkable. It found the 2 or 3 places. Hey, here's some place where there's misalignment. So we were able to go correct that. But it's remarkable how fast it can help you get to a point where you can make decisions and take action. And so Notebook is probably the thing that I use second the most pretty much on a daily basis. My leadership team, whenever we're sitting in a meeting, people are taking notes, everything's feeding into a notebook. And then we've got a notebook for each of the topics that we're working on.
And it's a great, as a source of truth, right? So that what you get from a conversation with Notebook LM is actually grounded in the source documents. And for listeners, you might find yourself familiar. We had Steven Johnson, who's the creator of Notebook LM, on the show several months back. He's one of our favorite authors who Google then pulled into the company to build this product. So if Notebook LM is kind of triggering your memory, it's because that Steven Johnson
But actually,
conversation.
one thing about that, which I don't think Jeremy we've talked about, is that he, of course, came into Google to create this kind of beautiful AI-based tool to help people to write. And what's fascinating is obviously that product suddenly got its kind of mojo when it added the audio thing. It's great for the other stuff, but like what really like got notoriety was like the podcast, like on-demand podcast stuff.
It's fascinating, right?
As we're talking about innovation, it is kind of like a fascinating thing because sometimes you don't really know where the innovation kind of hit will come from. And I would imagine that very few would have predicted that Notebook LM would have been like an audio hit, right? Like, because obviously the whole premise of it was that it was all about writing. And so I do think it is fascinating sometimes when we work with innovation that you kind of need to be in the process of making all the time, because otherwise you're just not in the game of kind of like discovery, those kind of like magical features. And the feature is kind of a little bit awkward in the interface and like the whole, like it's clearly something they just dropped in there almost as like a little party trick.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's funny going back to the, how are the ways that we do things? How do we get people to understand, learn, and experiment? After that PLG summit we did a couple of months ago, the person who ran it took all of the documents. So every one of the teams that had a proof of concept had a presentation or a document in prose, put that all into Notebook, and then had it create a podcast. We sent out to the engineering team and said, hey, here's a podcast of the summary from the PLG summit.
It's so good, right?
And now, I don't know if you've played with it, Brad, but now you can actually guide the podcast, the audio overview to focus on specific things. And so you could say, hey, I want you to do an audio overview, but only about the points of difference or only about the themes that emerged or focus on these teams. And it's actually able to do that now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds like I got to get back in and do that. I haven't played it up around with the audio as much. For me, it has become just an invaluable asset for search and for looking for insights.
I've got to tell you all, one thing that I have found incredibly valuable is asking Claude to critique replies that I have drafted but have not sent for my intent. So I'll say, Claude, I'm trying to accomplish this goal. Like right now, I'm in the middle of a negotiation with a client about a substantial piece of work. Here's the background context. I want you to leverage, insert favorite negotiator. I want you to leverage this framework, rate my reply per this framework.
Oh, yeah.
And twice, what's fascinating, I mean, I think I've got a pretty good beat on people and I've negotiated a lot of deals like this. So I kind of think I'm okay at it. Twice now in the last week, Claude's been like, I would not say that. That is not what, and emphatically. And then I'll kind of go, okay, yeah, I'll change that. And then I go, now notice how I tweaked it per your feedback. You did not incorporate my feedback. That's, and I've been actually, I mean, like, ball still in the air, so to speak, on whether it works. But at the very least, I would say my level of confidence has gone up tremendous. And my level of, I'm not confident to myself, but I think a lot of times you do stuff like that and you're like, unless I like get Brad Anderson on the phone, I have no idea whether this is a good strategy, right? Like, the average person off the street doesn't have a long Rolodex of amazing mentors who are capable of nuanced feedback, right? But now I can feed that into Claude and get actually, I mean, what feels like, again, TBD whether it actually is, but at least from the perception of the user, feels like incredibly thoughtful coaching that shifts the trajectory of those interactions.
Do you ever worry that we get to a point where the prism of the models make us blind? And what I mean by that is I do, as you do, Brad, I take now a bunch of content into a notebook or any of the models, and I have it help me basically figure out what are the core insights of it. To the point now where one of my lazy new behaviors is that I take whole books and I basically just shove them in there, like stuff that I don't have time to read, but it's on my read list. And I just kind of get it there.
Not
He's
approved.
shaking his head for everyone on the podcast.
Yeah, not
I
approved.
obviously
Not
pay
approved.
for it first. But you sometimes obviously worry then that, you take like a book like Idea Flow written by
As an
Jeremy,
example, go
and you
ahead.
say, hey, here's the book. Please summarize the major frameworks, the most interesting stories, and any kind of anecdote that is good of showing how do you come up with great ideas. And it'll spit out something and you can compute it pretty fast. But obviously I've lost the fidelity of like the thing. And so as you're now doing this more and more, how do you navigate in your brain the kind of like the desire for getting like things condensed and consumed fast and efficient with the anxiety of like letting something that is kind of alien technology kind of become the basically glasses on which you now consume all this?
What comes to mind for me is, so first of all, going back to what Jeremy was talking about, the way that I internalize what you described that you're doing, Jeremy, is you've got a methodology that you've built over years of practice here about how to negotiate, et cetera, et cetera. It's a methodology. And then you're taking that methodology and you're applying that in different actions, right? This to me, this is why I believe we're going to be living in a large language model world, small language model world as we go forward. It's not going to be one large language model that rules them all. We should talk a little bit about how do you make a decision when you use something like a ChatGPT versus when you use something like Llama, because there's a lot of decisions that you have to go into as a software engineer there. But fundamentally, what I believe is there are going to be all kinds of organizations on the planet. They're going to have unique data sets or unique methodologies. They will be able to schematize those methodologies, schematize that unique, take that data and train a large language model that is specific to healthcare, to financial services, to experience management. And then it's going to be multiple models working together that are going to be able to bring the expertise from around the world in a way that is not compromised. But to me, that's the key here. How do we enable all of these models to work together? And I think that also kind of leads back into the conversation we were having about the agentic future and how does that work? Because that's going to be a core part of that as well.
Going to the question about human behavior and, Henrik's kind of bell curve of lead users, the laggards and the resistors are, and going all the way back to the start of the conversation where you talked about everybody using AI every day. Are there mechanisms that you use to actually, is that a part of people's KPIs? How do you know whether people are? Is it just an opt-in, or is there some kind of accountability, or is it a natural selection process? How do you think about understanding what the workforce is doing?
So we were debating this right now as a leadership team, and I have a black and white thought on this.
Great.
I want people using our AI playground every day, and I know who comes into that every single day.
Hmm.
And so I believe that we should have OKRs that we have, everybody in playground once a day using it. And we should publish that to the managers and to the individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. And why do you believe that?
Because I think that, you get what you measure. And so if you really want to kind of push an organization to do something, you have to figure out a way to measure that so that you can course correct or you can nudge where you need to go nudge at. So I could walk around there, like if I were to pull up the list of people who have been in our AI playground in the last, week, it's half of the company. Half of the company has been in the last week, but you can see pockets of different functions that are not spending time in it. And so then what I would do is I would go to that function and say, listen, we did a hackathon where we had the engineers and the product managers and the designers go look at how could they put AI to work to make their jobs, make themselves more efficient. Let's go do the same thing with you. We will assign one of our AI specialists. Let's come in and have a hackathon for the finance department, a hackathon for the legal department, where, you take a day or two off and you just have people experiment with subject matter experts who can show them how to do it.
Yeah.
Then
What I'm hearing you say there, Brad, is it's not punitive. You're not measuring to punish, or at least to begin with, right? You assume it's probably ignorance, or they need help sparking their imaginations, right? I assume there's probably a different action to take if somebody is an active resistor and refusing. But the first step is we clearly need to do a better job of communicating the value here and helping people see that. And something like a KPI around, time in playground is a good heuristic for where do we need to deploy our specialists to go unleash the human capital here.
you got it.
I wonder how fast this is going to go, and if it's just going to go so fast that the resistors, like, honestly just will get washed out. Like, one of the things, if you talk to someone like you, Brad, is obviously had like such a long and successful career, but it's also, you clearly just picked up on this immediately. Like, the second it kind of like hit, I'm like, yep, this is a new tool, like it's the next kind of platform. And I think we all kind of just believe that the wave of AI is going to move so fast. And so we're now doing all these kind of like different exercises in, I think, all our organizations of how do we get people to use it. But I wonder if it's like a problem that honestly is going to solve itself a little bit. Because honestly, like in even like 6 months, if you are not using it, you're just going to be so disadvantaged. It's going to be like you saying that you don't use email or like something else that just would be kind of silly in today's world.
I get this question all the time from family and friends: is AI going to replace humans? What I tell them is, I said, AI is not going to largely replace humans. There'll be some functions for that it absolutely will. But one thing I can tell you is the humans and the organizations using AI are going to replace the humans and the organizations not using AI. It's that black and white.
Yeah, unquestionably.
And probably fast, right?
Yeah. Let's have a little bit of fun with some numbers. I think one of the reasons why my mind, sees these platform transitions is, back in the early 90s, I was participating in the transition from the mainframe to the PC, and I saw how the PC just completely transformed by doing things at a much more efficient rate, at a much more cost-effective rate, right? I then saw failures. I saw where Microsoft missed out on the iPod. Zune is not something I think anybody in the company was ever proud of. Missed out on mobile, how, they had a commanding presence in the browser and lost that. Those are experiences that you have where you see the lack of action or the lack of investment and focus can have a detrimental effect. But then I also saw the move to the cloud, and I was on the front rows of the move to the cloud as we moved Office to the cloud, as we moved all the management and security things that I was responsible for into the cloud. And so, you see how fast these things can pick up. But let me ask you a couple of questions. Let's talk about the move to the browser, mobile devices, and ChatGPT. How long did it take for Netscape to have 100 million active users?
I mean, like years.
Okay,
Did they ever get 100 million? I don't even know.
good for you, Jeremy. The highest that I can see is they were up at 85, and that was after 5 years.
Wow.
Okay, all right. How long did it take before there were 100 million iPhones in production and being used?
I'm going to go with 3 years.
I'll take that.
Yeah, a little bit more, 4.5 years.
Okay. Order of magnitude. That's not bad. Okay. We're in the ballpark.
All right, now it gets interesting. How long did it take for ChatGPT to have 100 million users?
From like 20 when GPT 3.5 kind of came out,
3.5 came out, yeah,
6 months.
weeks.
Wow. So wait, but so sorry, I wrote the question down and I want to make sure that we draw the line from your answer here to the question. So I'm just going to repeat it because I think the question you framed for yourself and then we're answering is how fast will it take AI augmented humans to replace AI refusing humans? That's what I wrote down as the question. And so what do you take from, you just mapped out that timeline. What are the implications of that, call it steepness of curve on the question of how long before AI augmented humans just replace non-augmented?
Yeah, thank you for holding me accountable on that. I appreciate it.
I didn't want to let you off the hook easy, right? To leave it for the audience to infer what they will. It's like, what's the statement? Let's hear it.
Yeah, I think that the examples we used of Netscape and the iPhone and ChatGPT just show the rate at which the new technology is being adopted. And this move to AI is going to happen faster than anything we've ever seen in our lives before. It's certainly a lot faster than the move from the mainframe to the PC, a lot faster than the move to the browser, a lot faster than the move to mobile. So the way that we think about it internally is if we are not staking out a position right now and in 2025 that we believe is where the long-term position of the company needs to be, we're going to lose.
Yeah.
You don't have years.
I think, and just to put a fine point on that for listeners, and we're preaching to the choir here, but for listeners to say, if I'm not staking out a position personally, I'm going to lose. I mean, I think it's true organizationally. I think it's true. So now that being said, I want to go back to this question of KPIs and measuring. You said it's clearly black and white. You're clearly in favor of actually measuring folks' engagement. What's the argument against measurements? Or can you steelman that argument? Why are folks I would assume on your leadership team arguing against doing everything we can to get people up this learning curve?
Yeah. So the arguments or the debates we're having aren't around, do we want our people using AI or not? It's a matter of if we're going to measure 5 things for the company, what are those 5 things? Right? It's where's the focus at? And so, it's more of a prioritization than it is, a lack of belief that we need to do this. It's interesting as I think about where we're at in kind of the AI adoption model right now, it has so many similarities to where the move to the cloud was, even as recently as 2017 and 2018. The number of times that I would talk with CIOs or chief security officers and talk about moving them to Microsoft 365 and moving from on-prem onto the cloud, where the response would be something like, over my dead body, are we ever putting our email in your cloud? Because I can protect it better than you can. And then that just melted. That just melted away and everybody's in the cloud now. You see the same thing happening with the adoption of AI. There's fear, there's unknowns, there's anxiety, there's caution. And so you have some organizations who are just blocking it outright. No Gen AI, you can't use it, right? Big mistake, in my opinion. I think this actually is a call that goes out to the chief security officers, to the CIOs. They have got to be experimenting more than just about anybody else in the company to understand how these things work and how they can be put to work in a way that makes everything better, more efficient, more productive, but still honors the privacy and the protection that brands give to their customers.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's the way I think about it.
That makes a lot of sense. I do think it's interesting that a lot of chief innovation officers, chief digital officers, tech teams are being kind of given the task of like, how do we get AI into the organization? And a few of them obviously are mostly compensated on making sure that the company is safe, right? Like it's like when you give this to the legal team and saying, how much AI should we put in? I had a conversation with the CFO the other day. We were talking about different ways of making sure that the wrong data didn't end up in the wrong foundational models. And he said, absolutely, we have to blah, blah, blah. And I go like, that's fine. So just give me a number. How much is that worth for you? Like, so what is the amount of money you're willing to pay to make sure that that happens? And then obviously the conversation completely changed because like he wasn't necessarily feeling that it was a 20 million like worth thing, right? It might be like a few $1 million thing, or at least like enough of a thing to show that we were doing it so that if ever there was any liability. So then it became much more nuanced. And so I am fascinated by kind of like your thoughts on who do you think is really the organization that should be driving this kind of adoption in any organization?
I think that varies by industry. Like for example, I'm a software guy, so I think the product and the engineering team should be the ones who are primarily driving it, but that's going to be biased. But to me, I guess the way I would answer your question is, if you think about any brand, any company, any division, there's going to be one aspect that is the core thing that is being sold, whether it's a physical product, whether it's software. I think whatever that organization is, that team needs to be engaged on a daily basis on how they're putting AI to work. Let me give you a couple of data points that may help you understand where a lot of my learning on this has come. Uh, so here at Qualtrics, when people think about Qualtrics, the first thing that comes to people's mind is they're a survey company. And that's where we started at 22 years ago, right? When the company was founded by a father and his two sons in the basement. But our investments over the last 5 to 7 years have been much more weighted on natural language understanding, natural language processing, AI. And to give you an idea of the scale at which we're operating at, that gives us this unique data to learn from. In 2024, we'll have about 1.2 billion survey responses come through our platform that we analyze. Okay, that's growing at about 16%. We will have over 2 billion conversations, the majority of which are calls with the call center, come through our platform for analysis, and that's growing 57% year over year. So, we will have over 2 billion calls come into our system. We transcribe it from voice to text, put it through our AI, come back and help an organization understand what can they do to improve the experience of the customers? What can they do to experience of the products? What can they do to improve the experience of the people who are supporting the customers? And as you do that, then you build loyalty, you build connection, and that leads to long-term value, LTV. But the scale at which we're operating at requires us to have just incredible people who understand how to put this new technology to work. And the scale is immense. Give you another interesting data point. The average survey is 13 questions. We've had more than 15 billion surveys that have been answered on our platform since our inception. That means we have over 200 billion human answered questions that we can anonymize and aggregate to learn from.
That's incredible. Are you getting to the point where you can predict what people will ask?
That's where I think it's going. So for example, you think about how research has historically been done, whether it's research on product, research on the customers. 3 years from now, 50-60% of that's going to be done synthetic. And so, you will have providers like Qualtrics who will have this immense data set that we've been able to train our AI with. And an organization will be able to go ask a question of what their users would want or what this community, this category would want. And without even having to go out and do research at all, be able to get an answer.
Okay, so I was actually just talking with a big, consumer brand yesterday at their headquarters here in Palo Alto, and doing a talk. And my talk was focused on experimentation as a means of creating data. And my big thing with surveys is they're great for the past, they're terrible for the future, because you don't want the user hypothesizing about the future. What would you do? No, Henry Ford. If I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? So great for what was your experience like, et cetera. Bad for imagining a future. in a world of synthetic data, and what I believe in, just to close the loop on experimentation, is you want to afford someone an opportunity to make a decision. A decision is the kind of data that's highly credible. An opinion or a sentiment is less highly credible because those are, excuse me, mister, I just wanted to know, if I brought you a beer every day at the end of work, would you want to drink it? It's really easy to manipulate that. Everybody says, sure, buddy, put me down for a yes for your, home beer service, right? Or whatever. Um, and that's like how a lot of surveying about prospective opportunities gets done. It strikes me that synthetic user kind of personas could be useful. How do you think about leveraging a synthetic data set for novel use cases in the future? I realize that's kind of a broad question, but you sparked it for me.
Oh, I'm a big believer that organizations like Qualtrics, like us, who have got this unique data set to learn on, are going to be able to come back and help organizations get answers to questions. Now you say decision, I term it as action. Decisions are actions. And I think what we're trying to do here is reduce the amount of time that it takes to get to a decision and reduce the amount of time that it takes to take an action. And if it takes you weeks or months to go out and do research, and there's another way to do it that is instantaneous, that's where I believe the market is going to head. And it's going to be organizations like ours that are able to pull that together and provide those experiences.
I like that. Reducing the time to action. Reducing the time to action. That's cool.
And eventually it becomes, you want to take actions in the actual interaction itself. And that's why I think this agentic future really comes into play. But, Jeremy, let me just build real quickly on your point about surveys are good for historical, but they may not be good for predicting the future. This is a place where I think generative AI is going to have a profound impact, because one of the things that we have built and is in production right now and being used broadly is generative AI powered surveys. So what that means is when you're asking an individual a question, it could be feedback, where do you think this goes? The survey through generative AI is automatically able to adapt and actually have a conversation. It's like a digital interview, but it's happening at the speed and the cost of a survey. And it's been fascinating what we have found on this. So, this is being used at scale right now. We call it conversational feedback. I didn't want to call it a survey because it's no longer a survey. It literally is. It's like a mini focus group, or it's a digital interview. And so here's what we find. 40% of the time when we see a vague or inactionable response and we prompt the individual to share more, 40% of the time they engage and they share more detail with no drop off on completion rates. What's fascinating then is there's all these different measurements that we use to understand the quality of that second response relative to the first. And so you can use things like the number of words, the number of syllables. There's a bunch of things that you can look at the lexicon and the language that is being used in there, and you get a quality score. And in all of those measurements, that second and third response is double the quality of the first response. So it completely transforms how quickly an organization can learn what they're seeking, because they now are having generative AI, put to work in a way that just brings in much higher quality feedback much faster.
On that note, do you think this will mean the end of NPS as a measurement of feedback? Because obviously NPS was a rudimentary kind of like just a number that was easy for us on the receiving end to compute. But now that you can ask high quality questions in the conversational survey format you just described, we can actually get much more fidelity in the feedback.
I think NPS will always be used at least for directionally. Is my customer satisfaction improving, decreasing? Is it staying steady? So, in terms of looking at what is happening over time, it's remarkable. But now, I'll give a very specific example. Someone gets the question of, hey, would you recommend us to a friend? The classical NPS question, right? Would you recommend us? And they give a 6. Well, using adaptive feedback, this conversational feedback, and say, what could we have done better? And let's say that, the individual comes back with a question of, or some response of nothing. That's not actionable. But if you can then ask the question, what could we have done better? You go a little bit deeper, you start getting feedback. Now what you're doing is you're actually going to be able to move the satisfaction of an individual when they're actually giving you feedback. Let me give you another really interesting example. I was talking with one of our large customers who is delivers an experience. And what they shared with us is when an individual, a customer, is having some kind of a problem during the experience, the NPS drops in half. If they're able to solve the problem during the experience. So, it could be like while you're at Disneyland, while you're at a hotel, while you're on a flight, they get half of that NPS loss back. If they don't solve it by the end of the experience, it drops by another 20 points.
Wow.
And so those are examples of how are you able to understand what individuals are experiencing, whether it's a prospect, a customer, or an employee, and then be able to take the action in the moment.
Right. Contextual.
Yeah. One last example, using these conversational feedback, we had one of our customers who's using this in production as a healthcare organization. And they had an elderly woman who was filling out, a survey. It was an online survey. And the way that our conversational feedback works is it understands when to show empathy. And so the individual was sharing what had been a poor experience. The conversational feedback came back with empathetic. And she actually called it out in one of her responses. Wow, you are so empathetic. You're listening to me. You're hearing me. This is the kind of thing that creates connection and loyalty with customers. And it was remarkable.
That's cool. That's cool. You know what? You're a wonderful podcast guest, and I know an even better grandfather. And we're grateful for your time with us today. It's so fun to catch up with you. I learn something new every single time I talk to you, Brett. Thank you.
You're kind. I feel the same way.
Okay, Jeremy, it's time for the wrap up. Let me prompt you like my favorite large language model.
I am your favorite large language model. What are you talking about?
Can you please put in a few bullets the most important concepts, frameworks, or ways of using AI that was mentioned in this conversation?
No, oh, wait. You literally prompted me like an AI. Thank you so much. Folks, if you could see how happy Henrik is with himself right now, you would really feel, you'd be blushing because quite happy for himself. Okay. Speaking as Notebook LM here for a moment. Of course, I resonated with the recess, with the idea of giving folks 2 days to experiment with the playground. I love the fact that they had so many demos that had senior leaders looking at them and assessing them and understanding. I think that's tremendous. I love the conversation about how do we think about driving behavior change and measuring. And of course, I'm on the Brad Anderson side of the spectrum that I think KPIs should reflect usage. And increasingly, it's got to be not okay to not take action. And right now, I think in far too many organizations, the status quo is inaction is acceptable. I think inaction must be a punishable offense with consequences. That's the only way to drive folks off of the sidelines. And by the way, Henrik, I did not say success has to be the thing that's rewarded, but I think action, experimentation, trying, fail 100 ways and I'll give you a promotion. If you have nothing that you have tried, we need to put you on the performance improvement plan. I think we have to make that shift, that inaction is the costly activity.
The thing that I really, really thought a lot about while he was talking was how much more value that we can get out of stuff that is already being generated. And so he had two kind of things where that became very clear. It's when he does an offsite and he takes all the notes and all the recordings and the conversations and what have you and just drop them in a Notebook LM. And then it's obviously when you do surveys and you have the ability to say, hey, I'm sorry you didn't like it. You gave us a score of 5. Can you tell a little bit more about that? And because that the system can be conversational and because that you can now compute a vast amount of input and distill it in a very efficient way, you can now get so much more fidelity out of all these things. And so I think what I was kind of racking my brain on while he was talking is like, what are other sources of output produce that I can already today kind of just use and then put in? Like you had a small example, which is just your email, like that you're about to do. But I do think it is fascinating to just brainstorm more and more in our own lives on what big kind of chunks of output that is already being generated that we can just kind of extract more value out from already today.
The other thing that's, as I keep looking at my notes while you're talking, sorry, I wasn't listening, but I'm kidding. I'm joking. I was. The other thing that stood out to me was the first thing he said when I asked him about AI culture, and he said, everyone in every function must be using AI every day. To me, that's a unambiguous objective. Everyone, every function, every day. And uh, that's, as a manager, whether I'm in middle management, whether I'm a senior leader, that is something that I can actually know or assess relatively quickly. And I love that. I love it when you have a criteria which can easily be demonstrated to be yes or no. And that to me is one that I go, oh, got it. Everyone, every function, every day.
I think that was good. What was that? What?
It's obviously the end of the day here, folks. You hear what happens. And here's the thing. Drop the conversation into an AI. You're probably going to get as good of a synthesis as we can give you. We're trying on the fly to do this, but for crying out loud, you can open Gemini, you can put the YouTube link in, and you can ask it what Henrik and Jeremy would say if they were smarter, if they had more gas in the tank, and it'll probably give you a better answer. Okay. Folks, if you enjoyed this conversation with Brad Anderson, amazing, amazing career, amazing leader. If you enjoyed this conversation, wish we talked to more people like him, would you please invite us to your conferences where we can meet people like Brad at dinner? I met Brad at a dinner and we hit it off. We got a man crush. And you know what I want? I don't know about Henrik. I want more conference invitations so that I can meet more people like Brad. We'll get them on the show. You will know what Henrik and I know in a private dinner conversation within 2 months. 2 months ago, Brad was telling me this stuff in private, and now the whole world knows it. If you want that kind of experience for whatever, big timer in your life, just invite me and Henrik to a conference, okay? For crying out loud.
And with that, thank you so much for listening.